Well, welcome, friends, to this discussion about Jesus's way in a social distancing world that we've found ourselves in. It's great to be here with my friend Rob and my friend Jon. And um, before we get started, guys, I got to know just kind of what your number is. Um, if 10 is this is a great day, greatest day ever, maybe, and 1 is I hardly could get out of bed today, I'm wondering how you're each doing. While you think about that, I'll give you mine.
Sure.
Okay, so I think I'm at about a 6, and I notice, interestingly, um, that my number when I look forward to, like when there's something in my day, like getting together with you and knowing that's there and that we're going to have a meaningful discussion, I notice that my number goes up. And I think I was much lower, and now it's at least a 6. So, Brother Rob, how about you?
I think I'm a 5 today. So I would agree. I think us having this conversation probably upped it a little bit. There's also Elliot has finished up first grade from his homeschooling parents. And there's something about that reality that I think is a little relieving for me. But there's I think I'm tired this week. I've been bumping into that a little bit too. So that's why I'm a little more middle of the road I'm a cheerful 5 is what I'm feeling like today.
Jon, how about you?
Oh man, I think last week my number would have been a lot lower, but I've been on vacation and I've been talking to you guys, and that bumps me up quite a bit. I've been on my 6. Like, I'm feeling better about life at this moment. So,
Jon, tell us, our listeners, what your role is, where you are, and what you do.
I am one of the pastors at Twin Falls Reformed Church in Twin Falls, Idaho, not Iowa, for those of you who are listening. And I share the pulpit, so every other week I preach. I'm also our discipleship guy, so I do all kinds of discipleship work. And then we're a larger church, so I also do a lot of staff management as well. I oversee our youth director, and we have 2 children's directors as well. And so we strategize together family stuff, young family stuff, like how do you reach the next generation is something that I think a lot about. So that's a lot of what I do.
Few hats, Jon.
Mm-hmm. It's good. Well, our purpose today, when we kind of dreamed and thought about all of you as friends, is that it just seems more and more compelling to us that people need men and women who are willing to provide a wise presence to others, especially during this season. And we feel, I think, more focused and more compelled in our own work during this season. And we want to share, I guess, that enthusiasm for what we're up to with you, and in some small way hope to be a bit of an encouragement to you during this COVID-19 season. And so today, Rob and I and Jon are, we don't really exactly have a script per se, but we want to take a dive into some of the handles that have guided us at Vantage Point 3 for a while, and kind of put that into the framework of the season that we're in with social distancing and what we're noticing and what we're thinking about. And so, Rob, I'm just wondering, you're really good at kind of framing things up. So tell me what you're thinking about as we enter into this conversation.
Sure. So I've been thinking about the Jesus way in the middle of this, and Pam talked about the handles. I think we'll unpack those words of particularizing, hospitable, patient, and deepening way that just seems to pop off the pages of the Gospels. But I think I want to frame it a little bit as we begin by saying that as we approach thinking about Jesus' way with others, given where we're at, whatever the sphere of influence, there's probably a less helpful question in the mix here and a more helpful question. And the less helpful question, I hope you consider, this is not an unhelpful question, just a less helpful question where we are, is what would Jesus do? in this or that situation, that because I think the more helpful question for us to be asking as men and women who care, kingdom people, right? However you want to define the details of that in your own life, is the more helpful question is, what is Jesus doing in the middle of this? And some of us are carrying a weight of imitating Jesus that without thinking about, well, that's not just a story from 2,000 years ago, that by the Spirit of God, Jesus continues to be up to this hospitable, particularizing, deepening, and patient way. And so even as we talk, or as I've been sorting this out, is let's pay attention to the work that he's already doing. And it's not easy work. I'm not suggesting that we're going to have some easy fill in the blanks as we talk about this. But I think it's the right question, particularly in this season, for us to be alert to and to begin to look around our Zoom meetings, homeschooling tables, supermarket visits, and even beginning to be together with our the fellow body of Christ, in whether that's through a screen or whether that's in person here, as some people are moving into that over the next month. So so what is Jesus doing? I think I would love for us to be asking that question as we come to these themes and these characteristics of what Jesus is up to that seems to run through reality. Make sense, Pam?
Yeah, it does. And I bumped into those 4 qualities when I was leading the journey process, and they've of course stuck with me for a decade or more. But I feel like that they're characteristics of Jesus that never wear out. But I'm not sure I know a story about, like, why did you pick these 4? Jesus has many characteristics, but I don't know the story of how you decided.
Well, I think when we were rewriting Emerging Leaders in 2004, and then year 3 would be called Enriching Leaders, and then Deep Mentoring another 4 years later, the question that we were really grappling with is, what earthly difference does Jesus make to the way we lead and serve in such a time as this? And as Randy and I talked about that and had input from other folks, it seemed like certain themes surfaced. But one of the things that became so clear is, culturally speaking, we're in a very depersonalizing time when people are treated as less than they are, a number, a demographic, right? I mean, it's just part of being in this mass society that we can't turn that back. But as we begin to pay attention to what is it about Jesus that I think would really lean against, that is personalizing? And I think these 4 words, and I think there were 5 originally. We had prayerful, and then we just sort of decided that flowed through all 4 of them. They have a way of leaning against the depersonalizing effects of just being awake. Certainly in North America, I think it probably works globally at this point too. And that Jesus has, that the way he develops people, the way he walks with people, is kind of an act of cultural resistance. And the way our culture has mentored us, these stood out. These 4 in particular. They're not an exhaustive list. There's other things we could certainly say about Jesus. But I think they focus into some of the deformation that's happening to us all the time. And where is the Spirit of Jesus inviting us to be more of who we are as his apprentices, as humans? And so, I think even in light of this season we're in, I'm not even sure the right word is season, but we're using it. That's the shorthand. Whatever this new place, I think Jesus, what's Jesus up to? He'll continue to be fairly hospitable, particularizing, deepening with us, as well as patient, unhurried. Maybe we could even use that word. So that's the context. And
yes,
this is sort of become a set of values or directions, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I have a bit of a nickname of Practical Pam, and so I'm kind of curious in this time, and I'm going to throw it to you, Jon. When you think of the hospitality of Jesus these days, I mean, what's that look like? Like, what's that mean to you, or what challenges you in that?
Oh man, there's so many things. There are a lot of people who are in the medical field right now that are working a significant amount, and it's very invisible. And there's a couple folks from our church decided to, like, they were going to write a handwritten letter to every single person in the hospital, just to let them know, like, hey, you're working hard, you're on the front lines, and there's something to be said about that, and we're thankful for that. And it's things like that. When I think of Jesus' hospitality, is seeing the struggle and the pain and the anxiety in people's lives and saying, I see that, and I want you to know that I see that. And there's something about me being able to see exactly where you're at in your struggle and your pain and all of that stuff. And maybe that's enough in this season. And so I'm seeing it in places like that for sure.
Yeah.
And I'd say too, Rob, that when we have the privilege of talking to people kind of scattered all over North America, and I would say this week in particular, it's becoming really evident that you can assume that each person that you talk with or know is tired.
Yeah.
There's a fatigue that is weighing on people emotionally, spiritually, physically, regardless of what their circumstances are. Would you say that's true, Rob?
Yeah. And I don't have to go real far either. I share in that dynamic. I think that it's surfaced in a way that I wouldn't have noticed 4 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. That now there's a fatigue that's just sort of the air we're breathing for a variety of different reasons. And I think one of the things that Jesus is doing in the middle of that fatigue is he's working in through men and women who are just show a lot of interest. Show interest. So I always think of the phrase that everyone's trying to be really interesting, but the people that influence us most deeply are those that are interested. And I think even just asking the next question when it's appropriate to see where people are, I think people are carrying that. I think that could be very hospitable, and is the way that often kingdom grace is caught maybe a little bit as someone is simply interested in the other person. I mean, even the letter to the hospital workers, I see you, right? Like that's a big deal. And so that comes to mind practically, even as I try not to try to be practical, is how am I showing interest in this person here, and see where they're at. And I think you're right. There's fatigue across the board for an awful lot of folks. Yeah.
In the quality of being particularizing, which I am absolutely certain was not a word in my vocabulary prior to becoming a friend of Vantage Point 3, but it's a word I absolutely love. You know, how do you think, you know, when we think of particularizing, we might think of the story of leaving the 99 for the one, certainly comes to mind. And I always think of just entering into the mess of people's individual lives and what paying attention closely looks like during that time and during this time. Any thoughts that come to mind particularly?
Well, there can be assumptions. I think that, one of the assumptions, just as men and women created in God's image, is that we have a tremendous need to be seen and known. And whether you Campbell in Mark 5 when Jesus asks the woman who touches him that gets healed, "Who touched me?" Or you ponder Jesus' way with Zacchaeus. Like he knew the suffering of Zacchaeus in a way that nobody else understood, right? The friendless one who heard that this dude might be a friend of tax collectors, makes him climb a tree. And so I think one of the things we can just carry with us, one is how important that is to Jesus in our own lives, but also particularizingly wise, even if that's not a word either way, is just the way in which he sees people uniquely, right? And we hunger for that. And it's not selfishness. It's confused with selfishness. So that's what makes it murky. But so that runs through my head a little bit with the particularizing that need to be known, that those who I work with, they carry that need, and my 5-year-old too, Rosie. So, yeah.
What about Jon for you?
I think so often we're able to abandon our posts because we think somebody else has got it taken care of in our neighbors' lives or our family's lives. Like the pastor's going to preach from the pulpit, or that person's going to say that one thing to the masses, and that's going to take care of the problem. And I think in the middle of all this social distancing stuff, that is just not the way that it can be anymore. And so the particular people in your life, your relationships with your family and with the person that lives across the street and that coworker matters significantly more today, perhaps than it did 2.5 months ago. And so like God has put the particular in your life, and now you and I have a duty to that in a way that we could kind of slough off before and kind of get away with it. And we can't now, so that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. How about you, Pam? What, you got a quick thought that runs through your head with that?
Well, I think my thought goes a little bit more to the next one on deepening. Because as I have felt the Lord nudging me for a number of months to particularly have more deeper relationships with a few. And you would think, like I've got plenty of relationships, but I really was feeling a void in my relationship network of an accountable, regular, you could call it small group or accountability or mentoring, whatever. But I reached out to 2 women to begin to meet monthly. And then you can't make good new old friends. And they are old friends, but long time together, but we don't meet intentionally around spiritual things. So we started virtually for now, but we live in the same area, and we'll meet for lunch. What our friend Sue and Tan calls a 3-2-1 group, and 3 of us meeting for 2 hours once a month over a meal. And so we did that already, and the blessing of that, like it would be really easy to zip past that and all that's going on, but the blessing of it already to just go into deep places intentionally. And our topic is, what are you thinking about? That's our topic, is what are you thinking about? And I'm really I guess that's one way that I'm finding myself leaning into this deepening quality specifically, and it's been good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we live so unreflectively in general, but one of the things that has been a little bit more hopeful, full of possibility, is I think this pause has increased the likelihood that people are reflecting a little bit more on their lives and what's important and what matters. And I mean, we're great at hiding, so we can dodge that, I think, still given COVID, but to be like, where might Jesus be inviting folks what's that next question that he always asks in the Gospels, or when he tells the story, and it just involves the listeners in such a, he just takes the conversation deeper. And I have to think, for an awful lot of folks that are the, they're the people that care deeply about the well-being of the church, type of people. I think the invitation to be honest right now is a place the Spirit is moving particularly. Years ago, it was hearing a mentor of mine from a distance, Dr. Houston, in 1994, I think it was, when he stood up to all the faculty at Biola University, and first words out of his mouth is, often when I'm in front of a group of people like this, I begin by saying, I want to be a Christian, but in spite of that, I want to be honest. And, a third of the room laughed. The other 2/3, I think, were a bit uncomfortable. And he said, why is it that the normal Christian life for so many of us is the emotionally dishonest life? It's the neurotic life. And I think we're in a bit of a time, the heat has been turned up, in which we need to provide some space, be a presence for people, and invite them, ask the next question in terms of inviting honesty. Because frankly, there's a fair amount of fear going around. And so pretending like it's not has never really helped anybody beyond about a 20-minute time frame. And so I think that in this deepening, sort of inviting depth, we have a desperate need for people that are both honest with their own lives, as we were talking about that earlier, Jon, but also are a presence that's not judgmental, that just allows people in their own pace to kind of speak where they are, So.
Well, speaking of pace, what do you think about the quality of patience? Jon, does it...
You got a corner on that one, Jon?
Yeah.
You got all the...
Man. I think we're in a season where people are losing it at this point. And I think we're going to have to learn to be a little bit more patient with each other as the octane continues to rise, just because of the moment that we find ourselves in. I think people are losing their patience with authorities. You can see that. People are losing patience with their workplaces, with things, and in the middle of it, people are just a little bit more on edge because of all of those things, that underlying anxiety that we talked about before. It's there, and it's taking its toll on us. In the middle of that, to be able to be that presence that can hold the tension, I think matters a lot right now. We can be reactive toward people when it gets ugly, or when just the heat gets turned up, or we can be reflective and listening. And gosh, I think it's a really big deal. And maybe we haven't hit that yet with where we're at, but I think we're at least headed there, where we need those calming presence people that can just hold the tension and be okay with that. So,
there's certainly been moments around here in the last 8 or 9 weeks where I got a flat out letter F for behavior. But I want to be, I think of the people, the friends of ours listening to this, we are kind of drawn to this Vantage Point 3 way and work because we are developmentally minded people ourselves, and hoping to continue to be on a maturing path and helping others mature into the fullness of who Christ can be. And I want to be, through God's goodness, a maturing voice. I want to be patient in the development of others as they are, and the Lord's patient with me. I want to keep silent as these vexing spirits come and go.
Yeah.
So it's quite a high bar, but I think that, I pray for to be tested and also to have, the mercy of the Lord all at the same time.
Well, and that's where I think, Pam, you're like, I'm just, so I'm, homeschooling dad, and nothing sort of tells me a little bit more about where I actually am as a person than a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, and 1-year-old and their life together. And so there's an element of what Jesus' role in each of our lives that is so utterly demanding. Like when you look at him and the way he is reflective, not reactive, is about the other. And but I think there's also a place where we also need to know Jesus' way is so gracious. And I think of that even moment at the table in Luke 22, after he says the things to the disciples about who I'm among you as one who serves, and then he gives them this authority. You are these sorts of kingdom people. And then Peter comes front and center, and he says to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan is asked to sift you like wheat. When you turn back, strengthen your brethren. And so Peter's failure is already part of the Lord's plan and love in his life, right? And you read the rest of that chapter, it gets even better as Luke includes the detail after Peter denies Jesus 3 times, that he looks across the courtyard at him. And I got looks in my life that stick with me. I can tell you about some of them that are both fearful and absolutely wonderful. And you can't help but, as you read Acts and some of Peter's words in 1st and 2nd Peter, that look lingered, right? That look, that was this mix of demand and grace. And so we can know that about him. Like, we're going to get this stuff wrong, right? Like, I've been mentored as a do everything faster sort of person. So there's a lot of unlearning left. And where I'm discovering where most of that unlearning's coming is in my homeschooling hat with a 7-year-old that this needs to be done a half an hour ago, and chop, 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 chop. And, oh, Elliot, forgive me. And that's where Jesus might be looking at me across the table yet again, I think, sometimes. So we need to see that look, right, as we carry the weight of this kingdom way in the world. We are not the source of all that. Jesus by his Spirit is. So
Go ahead, Jon.
I think I was just thinking of right before Jesus ascends, and the disciples say, like, hey, like, is the kingdom coming anytime soon now? Like, can we expect that? And Jesus doesn't really give him a good answer for that. It kind of leaves him hanging and then disappears. And in our anxieties, which I think we're all living in the rise of anxiety, we're asking that question, like, okay, kingdom, like, well, let's take it now, like, it'll come now. And then we start expecting that of everyone around us at the same time. And so if you're not acting like you're living in the kingdom, then that's not really going to work for me right now, because I'm already not in a great spot. So we need you to act perfectly, please, just like the kingdom is here. And Jesus says it's not time yet. And so to be patient with people, because they're not going to act perfect. To be patient with ourselves, because it's true for us too, like, it's the kingdom has not arrived like we thought it was going to, or at least we want it to. And so
that's a great word.
Well, thank you both, and thank you for sharing this time with us. And Rob, I'm wondering if you might have a closing thought or a blessing for our
Yeah.
listeners and friends?
St. Patrick's prayer comes to my mind. We ended the mentoring guide with it. Blessings on the journey. And I think this would be a good way. Remember yes, that one. There you go.
Yep.
The prayer, the right question, the better question right now is, what is Jesus doing? And I encourage you as you pray each morning. And so I think St. Patrick's words that have been around for a good long time might be a good blessing for us as a community. So let me read this. Christ as a light illumine guide me. Christ as a shield overshadow me. Christ under me. Christ over me. Christ beside me on my left and my right. This day be within and without me, lowly and meek, yet all powerful. Be in the heart of each to whom I speak, in the mouth of each who speaks unto me. This day be within and without me, lowly and meek, yet all powerful. Christ as a light, Christ as a shield, Christ beside me on my left and my right. Amen?
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you each.
Good to be together.
Great to be together.